Okay, so on to the big species, starting off with the humpback whale. So there's a really great chance you're gonna see lots of humpback whales. And the thing with humpback whales viewing is they spend periods of time on the surface, and then they can have deeper dives that can last anywhere between 5 to 10. We had 20-minute dives this summer, so it's good to be able to have lots of knowledge to fill that gap. So humpback whales, they're grey whales. They're also the largest whale that we'll see out there. They can get up to the length of about marauder, about 61 feet, about 18 meters long, and they can weigh up to 40 tons. So they're definitely a really big whale to see. You'll see them coming to the surface, and what will be protruding is their little dorsal fin. Nice to point out that their dorsal fins are much more reduced compared to, say, a dolphin. You'll also be able to get brilliant views of their tails. Humpback whales throw their tails up into the air before they go for a deep dive. And they use that tail really to propel themselves deeper into the water. It's a bit like us. If we're in a swimming pool, we can use flippers to push ourselves down deeper into the water. And that's what a humpback whale uses its tail for. Another really interesting fact about the humpback whale's tail is the underside of it actually acts like a fingerprint for that specific whale. So these whale tails, they can sometimes have an all white pattern, an all black pattern, percentages of the two. They can have markings and scrapes and scars and tears out of their flukes, and that is unique to that specific individual. So we do try and take photos on our trips, and we really want to get a photo of the underside of the whale's tail, because we can then match that with our references to see exactly who we're looking at. And also is nice because it includes the passengers in a little bit of science as well. They are helping to keep track of these whales out in the ocean. So it's nice to bring in that kind of citizen science aspect into viewing these animals. There is a website called happywhale.com, which there's a slide in the boat that you can show passengers. Happywhale.com is where they can upload their own photographs of any humpback whales they've ever seen. It cross matches them, and they can see where that humpback whale has been. Reason why that's so interesting is because humpback whales are migratory, so they do not spend the whole year here in the waters of Victoria. These are just their summer feeding grounds, so they come up from areas like Mexico and Hawaii, where they spend their winters in some winter sunshine, and they make their way north in about April time. They'll arrive and they spend about 6 to 7 months feeding. Reason that they need to spend that amount of time just concentrated on feeding is because back in Mexico, Hawaii in the winter, that's their breeding grounds. And they actually forget to eat while they're breeding. They're not very good multitaskers, the humpback whale. So they come up here and they're starving. They just spend about 6 to 7 months feeding. What do they feed on? They feed on mainly Pacific herring is what they're going to be feeding on up here, and also a shrimp-like invertebrate called krill. And then that brings me nicely on to the type of whale these are. Humpback whales are baleen whales. Baleen is just like a giant fingernail-like structure that the humpback whale has in their mouths. They're made out of keratin, so same substance as our fingernails, and we've got some in our hair as well. But really they're just like giant fingernails in their mouths. A humpback whale can have around 400 of these baleen plates in their mouths, and they can be nearly a meter long, so pretty impressive image to paint in our guests' minds, that big fingernail filled mouth of the humpback whale. So when they're going through the water, when they're trying to feed, they open up their huge mouths and they can expand due to the throat grooves that run down from their mouth down to their belly. So they can expand their mouths and their throats. They take in the water and the fish and the krill as a byproduct. They'll stick their tongue to the roof of their mouth, they'll shoot the water back out through these fingernails, and the fish and the krill get stuck behind there and they can just swallow that whole. They are eating very small prey items in comparison to their huge size, so they do have to eat thousands of pounds worth of food to be able to fill their bellies. Really interestingly as well, humpback whales are actually incapable of eating anything bigger. They are restricted to prey items no bigger than the size of an apple. That is the biggest prey item that they can swallow whole. Which means sometimes they do get some interlopers that make their way into their mouths, but luckily they just get spat out. So for example, harbor seals, sea lions, even some seabirds, they may be going for the same prey items as a humpback whale. They can by mistake get it sucked in, but luckily for them they'll get spat right back out. The humpback whale does not want to eat them. I definitely, if you can, look up image taken, I think it was near Monterey Bay in California this summer, of a sea lion getting spat out of a humpback whale's mouth. It's pretty impressive, but that is what they have to do because they cannot be swallowed. So they just get tufted out, maybe a little bit worse for wear. So they are some of the main fun facts about the humpback whale. Also, it's really awesome to mention the humpback comeback. So this is the term given to the increase in population we've been seeing of the humpback whale over the past few years. Of course, you'll know back in the whaling era, about 95% of humpback whales were killed off due to whaling. But they are really starting to come back in high numbers. So it's really great to emphasize that. If you see a humpback whale, you can say, you know, if we came out several decades ago, this wouldn't have been possible, but they are regenerating. And it is a success story. There's a lot of doom and gloom out there about climate change and the impacts on our wildlife and global warming, but the humpback comeback is really a great positive thing to mention as well. So if you get the chance to show the passengers the little slide of the actual humpback whale, it's cool to point out a couple of other features that are not visible when they are just surfacing and diving. One of which is their pectoral fins. So their fins at the side of their body. These can be up to about a third of the length of their whole body. So say, for example, you've got a 15-meter long humpback whale, a pectoral fin will be about 5 meters long. That's pretty impressive. And these big long pectoral fins have actually gained the humpback the name of angels of the sea, because they look very angelic as they are floating around. So it's quite neat to mention those pectoral fins. Also, on the edges of those pectoral fins are little bumps, little nodules, or tubercles, and these little bumps actually help the humpback whale be more hydrodynamic, so it helps them while they're swimming through the water. Really interestingly, I read that they've actually taken this design and applied it to wind turbines. They've put these little notches on the edges of the propellers, and supposedly it has increased the efficiency of these wind turbines up to 40%. So thank you, humpbacks, for introducing that to us. It's pretty neat. Another thing to mention is actually the little tubercles themselves, those little bumps. They are over the head of the humpback whale as well. They don't look the most pleasant of things, but they do have a very unique purpose. So these little tubercles, these little bumps, they're actually hair follicles. and they're remnants from when these animals came from land once upon a time. So about 50 million years ago, humpback whales evolved from land animals. The land animals that they evolved from are ungulates, so they would have been feeding on the land, and they actually made their way closer to the water's edge due to predators. They wanted to get away from them, and then they started to evolve feeding habits to feed off and around the intertidal zone, and they just got deeper and deeper into the water until they evolved into the whales that we know today. So those little hair follicles are remnants of when they used to be land animals. But now the purpose of those little hairs in those follicles are to pick up vibrations. They can pick up vibrations of fish and other prey, so when the humpback whale is feeding, they know where to go to get the best feed. So that is now the purpose of those tubercles. And that's a really interesting point, that humpback whales actually don't use echolocation like the orca. They do use vibrations instead. So another feature to mention of the humpback whale is its blowholes. Humpback whales actually have two blowholes, not a singular one like the toothed whales, your dolphins and your orca, and they do in fact have two. That means their blow, that puff of air when the animal breathes at the surface, is the best way of spotting these animals when we're out on the water. Their blow can get up to about 3 meters tall. It's pretty evident when a humpback whale blows. And interestingly, that blow, it's not purposely shooting water out like an elephant would out of its trunk. It's just the hot air condensating. So another common question you may get asked is, how old does a humpback whale live to? Now this comes with a pretty interesting story. If you were just to look it up in wildlife books or on the internet, you'll probably get an answer that is about 50 or 60 years old. In fact, it could actually be over 100 years old. That could be the lifespan for a humpback whale. Reason being, it comes from a relative of the humpback whale called the bow-headed whale. There was a bow-headed whale that was found about 10 or so years ago up in Alaska, and it had remnants of a harpoon. They managed to retrieve the harpoon from the bow-headed whale and date it back about 100 years or so. That harpoon was 100 years old. Now, when the whalers harpooned whales, they rarely went for the calves. The money was in the bigger animals. So they estimated that this animal could have been anywhere from between about 15 to 30 years old when it was harpooned. So they think it was about 130 years old, this bow-headed whale. Now, being a relative of the bow-headed whale, the humpback whale may actually have the same lifespan capacity. So that's a pretty interesting story to share with your passengers. When you're viewing the humpback whale, some passengers may get a little bit impatient between viewings. Hopefully it's only around 5 or 10 minutes, and this is a great time to tell them that humpback whales are actually very deep diving whales. They can stay underneath the surface for about 45 minutes in one breath is their longest breath hold. So just remind them that they're very lucky that it's not 45-minute dives, that 5 minutes is nothing compared to their full capacity. Also, it's pretty cool to mention their deepest dive can be up to around 200 meters. The depth of the Salish Sea averages about 200 meters, so you could imagine the humpback whales in that area can reach the sea floor. Not that they do that, they would only do that out of necessity. If there's food closer to the surface, they're gonna go for that and not expend any excess energy.